rocker is off his rocker. Chapter 1. Science is for nerds. My name is AJ and I hate school. Why do we need to read if we have books on CD? Why do we need to learn social studies if that stuff happened a long time ago and we cannot do anything about it now? I hate that stuff, but there's one subject I really hate. Andrea Young. Well, Andrea is not exactly a subject. She's this annoying girl in my class. Even her curly brown hair is annoying. Guess what, AJ said? Andrea said as we were putting our backpacks away. I replied, your butt? Anytime somebody asks, guess what? You should always say your butt. That's the first rule of being a kid. I know what AJ stands for, Andrea said. Do not. Do too. We went back and forth like that for a while. There's no way Andrea could know what AJ stands for. I never told anyone, even my best friends. Ryan and Michael don't know. If anyone ever found out what AJ stands for, I'd have to get a new name. I'd have to leave town. AJ stands for... Andrea never got the chance to finish her sentence because our teacher, Miss Daisy, came in. Enough chit-chatting, said Miss Daisy. It's time for show and share. Oh, man, I forgot about show and share. We were supposed to bring in something that starts with the letter D and tell the class about it. I looked in my desk for a D word. Nothing. I looked in my pocket. All I had was lunch money. But wait, a dime. Dime begins with D. I brought a dime, I told Miss Daisy. Good. What can you tell us about the dime? The dime, AJ. It's worth 10 cents. I said, and everybody laughed, even though I didn't say anything funny. Andrea was waving her hand in the air and got caught on, of course. The word dime comes from the Latin word dicamus, Andrea said. I hate her. Very good, Andrea said. Miss Daisy said. How did you know that? I looked it up in my D word, Andrea said. I brought in a dictionary. I use it at all the time at home to look up words. Andrea grinned her little I'm so smart grin. Ryan, who sits next to me, whispered, if she was really smart, she wouldn't have to look stuff up. Andrea, would you please look up the word science? Asked Miss Daisy. S-C-I-E-N-C. What a dumb spelling. There's no reason why that word should have a C in it. Andrea turned the pages of her dictionary. She said. Here it is. Science is knowledge made up of an orderly system of facts. I have knowledge made up of an orderly system of facts that have been learned from study, observation, and experiment. Very good. Andrea smiled her I know everything smile, and she was going to keep her dictionary on her desk from now on, in case she had to look up any other words. Why can't a box of dictionaries fall on her head? I have good news, Miss Stacy said. We have a new teacher at Ella Elementary. His name is Miss Docker, and he used to be a real scientist. He retired now, but he agreed to come back to teach us science. That was good news. It sounded like bad news to me. We never had to learn science before. Now just because some old guy doesn't like being retired, we had to learn a new subject. It wasn't fair. Why did I have to learn science? It's not like I was going to be a scientist someday. When I grow up, I'm going to be a football player. I play pee-wee football. Tackling people is fun. Suddenly, Mr. Coots, our principal, poked his bald head into the doorway. Has anyone seen Mr. Docker? He asked. I think he ran away. We'd better line up in ABC order and go look for him, said Miss Daisy. Quickly, to the science room. I didn't need any dictionary to tell me what science is. Science is for nerds. Chapter 2. The Power of the Potato. We walked 1,100,000 miles to the science room. Michael, who never tied his shoes, was the line leader. Science is for nerds, I said. Science is fun, said Andrea, who thinks everything about school is fun. The science room is probably the weirdest room in the history of the world. In the corner, there was a skeleton wearing a top hat. There was a cage with white mouse running around it. There were strange machines, microscope computers, plants, and other stuff all over the place. This place is freaky, Ryan said. Where is Mr. Docker? Andre asked. I don't know, Miss Daisy said, who doesn't know anything. We were looking at all the junk when the door banged open, and an old guy came in. He was standing on those rolling things that look like an old-time lawnmower. He was wearing a helmet, goggles, and one of those doctor lab coats. What a nerd. Hi, everybody, he said. I'm Mr. Docker. Then he smashed into the chalkboard and fell off his rolling thing. We all ran to pick him up off the floor. Are you okay? We asked. Never better. Miss Docker took off his helmet and goggles. He had crazy gray hair that went off in directions. It looked like he hadn't combed in years. If my hair looked like that, my mother wouldn't let me out of the house. Hey, I've seen this guy before, Ryan whispered. He lives down the street from me. Mr. Docker reached into his lab coat and pulled out a potato. He took a bite out of it. Sorry I'm late, Mr. Docker said. I had to harvest my tubers. Huh? I don't know what he was talking about. Tubers are potatoes, Andrea said. I looked it up in my dictionary once. Very good, Mr. Docker said. Welcome to science. I'm going to take you on a scientific journey. We're going to explore the wonders of our world. The future is in our hands. You will be the scientist of tomorrow. Not me, I said. I'm going to be a football player. But we all can be scientists, Mr. Docker said. All you have to do is look around and ask why. Why does Earth spin? Why do dogs wag their tails? Can anybody think of any other science questions? Why do we have to learn science? I asked. Andrea looked at me and rolled her eyes. That's a good question, Mr. Docker said. I snuck out my tongue at Andrea. Na boo boo. We have to learn science because science is around us, Mr. Docker said. When you bounce a ball, you're learning the science of physics. When you look at a flower, you're learning the science of botany. When you pick your nose, you're learning the science of biology. You're also getting the boogers out, I added. Ryan said he was a scientist because he went on the intern and found out how to make a stink bomb. We're all scientists, Mr. Docker said. Any kids make great scientists. And kids make great scientists because you're naturally curious. I love it when kids ask why questions. Does anyone have any other why questions? Why can we not go to recess yet? I asked. Science is more fun than recess, Mr. Docker said, as he took something out of his desk drawer. Let me show you something. I brought this from my laboratory at home. What is it? Asked Emily. A potato clock. Mr. Docker said, There are no batteries. You don't plug it into an outlet on the wall. It's powered by the chemicals in a potato. Watch this. He took 2 potatoes out of his desk and put it in the clock. Then he took the wires that went to the clock and stuck them into the 2 potatoes. The little screen on the clock said 10:15. It works! We all shouted. Wow, that's cool. I love potatoes, said Mr. Docker. Then he let out his clacking laugh, just like scientists do in the movies. That's a sure sign that somebody is crazy. Why did they make a clock out of potatoes? Andre asked. I wanted to see time fly. Mr. Docker said, Get it? Time fry? Potatoes, French fries. I laughed at his joke, even though I thought it wasn't very funny. My friend Billy, who lives around the corner, told me that if a teacher makes a joke and you don't laugh, they get mad and give you extra homework. So always laugh at your teacher's jokes, no matter how bad they are. That's the first rule of being a kid. But seriously, Mr. Docker said, the Earth is going to run out of oil someday. We need to use other forms of energy. Like potato power? I asked. Exactly, Mr. Docker said. Imagine if 2 potatoes can make enough energy to run a clock. What could 200 potatoes run? Or 2,000? or 2,000,000. Mr. Ducker is a real potato freak. But as he was talking, his potato clock stopped. What is it? Asked Michael. Time to change potatoes. Mr. Ducker then let out his evil, demented, cracking laugh again. Mr. Ducker is off his rocker. Chapter 3. Stop, drop, and roll. Andrea was obnoxious with her dictionary. Every 5 minutes, she looked up another word so she could show how smart she is. But I got her. When she went to the bathroom during cleanup time, I snuck over to her desk and opened the dictionary. I flipped through the pages until I found the word stupid. Then I drew a picture of Andrea and a line pointing to the word. It was great. You should have been there. I closed the dictionary just before Andrea came back from the bathroom. Na boo boo on her. I couldn't wait for her to find the picture. Miss Daisy told us to line up for science. We walked 1,100,000 miles to the science room. Mr. Ducker wasn't there yet, but then he rode in on that lawnmower thing. He was eating potato chips. Mr. Ducker sure loved potatoes. I'm sorry I'm late, he said. I was reading a book about helium. I just couldn't put it down. And then he did that cracking laugh, demented laugh. So we had to laugh so he wouldn't give us extra homework. Mr. Ducker told us that he is 80 years old and he has seen a lot of science in his life. When he was a kid, they didn't have important stuff like a microwave, popcorn, Velcro, or sneakers that light up when you walk. Wow, I said. Do you remember when they discovered fire? Were you there when they invented the wheel? I'm not quite that old, Mr. Ducker said. But when I was your age, they didn't have video games. No video games? I asked. How did you survive? I did experiments, he said. Let's do an experiment right now. What do you think would happen if we combine water with the chemicals citric acid and sodium bicarbonate? Beats me, Michael said. Let's do an experiment to find out, said Mr. Ducker. He took one of those tiny little plastic cans they used to hold cameras film and put it in hot water. He dropped in a piece of Alka-Seltzer, which is the medicine my dad takes when he has a stomach ache. Then he snapped on top of the film can and put it upside down on the floor. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then the film suddenly shot up into the air and bounced off the ceiling. The chemical reaction gives off carbon dioxide gas, Mr. Doctor said. That can nowhere to go, so it blasts off. Wow! Even I had to admit that was cool. Mr. Docker told us about the science used something called a scientific method. First think of a question or problem, he said. Then try to guess what the answer is. After you do an experiment, then you look at the results from a conclusion. That is a scientific method. Mr. Docker asked if anybody had any questions, and Andrea, of course, snuck her hand in the air. I have a why question, Andrea said. Why is the sky blue? What a brown loser. Everybody knows why the sky is blue. Because the air is blue. The sky is blue because Roy C. Biv, Mr. Docker said. Roy C. Biv? I said, who's that? He's right outside, Mr. Docker said. He took out this glass thing that was shaped like a triangle. He brought it over to the window where the sun was shining in. This is called a prism, he told us. It's going to help us find Roy G. Biv. Mr. Docker held the prism thing up to the sunlight, and the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. A big old rainbow appeared on the wall of the room. It was cool. Roy G. Biv stands for red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Said Mr. Docker. Sunlight is made up of these different colors. The prism separates them, but when sunlight goes through air, the light particles scatter and bounce off the oxygen atoms. Most of the colors don't scatter very well, but blue scatters really well in different directions. It has a short wavelength. That's why the sky looks blue. Andrea was taking notes this whole time. What is her problem? See? Asked Mr. Doctor. Just about anything is science. I know something that's not science, I said, blowing stuff up. Blowing stuff up is cool. Blowing things up is dangerous, Andrea said. Can you possibly be any more boring? I asked. You're both right, said Mr. Doctor. Blowing stuff up is cool and dangerous. It's science too. We cannot blow stuff up here, but that gives me a good idea for a what-if experiment. What do you think will happen if I take raw sodium and put it into water? It will get wet, I said. It will melt, Andrea said. I think it will float, Ryan guessed. Those are good guesses, said Mr. Docker. Let's do an experiment to find out. The conclusion will then we'll take a look at the results, form a conclusion. Mr. Docker pounced water into a pan. He put a pair of goggles on, then unlocked a cabinet and took a chunk of sodium with a big spoon. Don't try this at home, kids, he said. He dropped the chunk of sodium into the pan, and then the most amazing thing in the history of the world happened. There was a big flash of light. It lit up the whole room. A flame jumped out of the pan. It was a cool way, and we saw it live in person. The chemical reaction creates heat, said Mr. Docker. Just then, something crazy happened. His hair caught on fire. Uh-oh, said Mr. Docker. That's not supposed to happen. Flames and smoke were coming off his head. It was like he was a campfire. It was a real Kodak moment. Stick your head in the sink, Michael Deal. Stop, drop, and roll, said Andrea. Throw dirt on him, somebody else yelled. But we could not do any of those things. Mr. Docker went running out of the room, screaming that his head was on fire. He ran pretty fast for an old guy. It was cool. Maybe science isn't nerdy after all. Chapter 4. Going on a field trip. I learned an important lesson in science class. If you mix raw sodium and water, your head will catch on fire. Mr. Docker wasn't in school for a few days later. The incident. We were worried about a few days later. For a few days after the incident, we were worried about him. The final day before the spring vacation, Mr. Docker was back at school, and we had science class. I almost didn't recognize him. He had a lot less hair. He looked more normal. Mr. Docker had set his head on fire for a long time ago, if you ask me. Mr. Docker, where do bugs go in the winter? Michael asked. Some of them dig holes in the ground, said Mr. Docker. Some go to sleep, some die. That's so sad. Emily was a crybaby. Can we pick our noses and look at the boogers under a microscope? I asked. Not today, said Mr. Docker. Today, we're going on a field trip. Hooray! Everybody shouted. Field trips are cool because we get to leave the school. Any place that isn't school is better than school. Where are we going on our field trip? Andre asked. To a field, of course, said Mr. Docker. That's why we call it a field trip. Boo, I said. Field trips are boring. We should go someplace cool like a skate park. We had to walk 1,100,000 miles to the field behind the school. Then we had to walk around some more in the field. Mr. Docker, everything is science. Every 5 seconds he would stop and tell us the name of some tree. He picked up leaves and showed them to us. He threw a rock in the pond and told us about the ripples in the water. We watched birds and smelled the flowers. The best part, when Mr. Docker let us have a rest and have some pretzels he brought along, we all sat down on a big log. To Mr. Docker, even a dumb log is science. Part of this wood is rotted away, he said. Let's see what's inside. He pulled off a piece of the log, and we saw the most amazing thing in the history of the world. Bugs are crawling all over. Eek! Shouted the girls. They got off the log and started screaming their heads off. Kill them! Shouted the boys. We grabbed sticks and started hitting the log. Don't be afraid, Mr. Docker said. Bugs are our friends. Oh, yeah? Ryan said. Well, one of our friends is Emily. It was true. The big, black, disgusting thing was crawling up Emily's arm. Eek! She screamed, and then she went running in circles. It was hilarious. What a crybaby. Mr. Docker got down on his hands and knees and started telling us about the little critters on the log. Nobody wanted to touch them. Relax, Mr. Docker said, and he actually picked up some gross bug with his fingers. It's just a beetle grub. And then he did the most amazing thing in the history of the world. Mr. Docker took the beetle grub and put it in his mouth. Ew! We all thought we were going to die. Even Ryan was grossed out. He would just eat about anything. Mr. Docker said as he chewed the bug. This makes a better snack than pretzels. Try it. You just have a squeeze to the larva to clean it out its insides. Ew! Bugs are good for you, Mr. Docker told us. They have more protein than steak. People all over the world eat bugs. Did you know that if you look at a slug, your tongue gets numb? I think I'm going to throw up, I said. What's the big deal, Mr. Docker said. People eat cows, pigs, shrimp, lobsters. Bugs are animals too. They can be fried, roasted, or made into soup. Sometimes I sprinkle them on my cereal. Ew! I had to admit, the idea of eating bugs was cool, but that didn't mean I was going to eat one. All in all, we were totally grossed out. When we got back to the school, Mr. Docker told us he had exciting news. We're going to put a science fair, he said. I want everybody to think of a what-if question and design an experiment to answer it. Bring your experiment on Monday after vacation. What? We had to spend our vacation doing work? That's totally unfair. I think I'm gonna go home and think of a good what-if question tonight, Andrea said. So, I'll have the whole vacation to work on my experiment. That gave me an idea for a what-if question. What if a tree of bugs fell on Andrea's head? The science not fair. Vacations are the best. No school for a whole week. No teachers yelling at you to stop talking. No homework. No getting up early. No Andrea. My family went to the beach. I didn't think about school once. It was great, but then Monday came, the worst day of the week. When I got on the bus for school, I was tired because I had to get up so early. Good morning, I grunted to Miss Cornell, the bus driver. Bingo boo, Miss Cornell replied. Miss Cornell is not normal, I thought. I was in some weird science fiction movie. All the kids on the bus had strange stuff on their laps. One kid had 2 soda bottles stuck together, and he was shaking them to put a little tornado. One kid had a microscope. One kid had a bunch of balloons. Then I remembered the science fair. I sat next to Ryan. He had some boxes of cereal and a big magnet. He He said he was going to find out how much iron was in each kind of cereal. All morning I tried to think of an excuse for not bringing it an experiment. I could say my dog ate it because I used that one time the last time. Besides, I don't have a dog. Finally, it was time for science. Mr. Docker came into our class so we wouldn't have to carry our experiments to the science room. Everybody had an experiment on their desk. Everybody but me. Didn't you do an experiment, AJ? Asked Andrea. You're going to be in trouble. So is your face, I said. Let me give you advice. If you ever get stuck and you don't know what to say to somebody, just say, so is your face. If somebody says you're ugly or some other thing, just say, so is your face. There is nothing they can say. You can't go wrong with so is your face. Everybody started asking Mr. Docker questions. Number 4, I sang all the songs of my favorite Annie. Andrea started singing that dumb song about the sun coming out tomorrow. I'm surprised that the flowers numbered 4 didn't die. I whispered to Ryan, and what's your conclusion, Andrea? Asked Mr. Docker. Number 4 grew the tallest, she said. So my conclusion is that flowers like to hear me sing. That's more than I can say for human beings. You get an A, Mr. Docker said. Who's next? AJ? AJ didn't do an experiment, Andrea said, as she was putting her box away. I did too. It must be invisible. So is your face, I said. I walked up to the front of the room. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I had to think fast. My what if question is, what if you don't feed fish? I said. I beg your pardon, asked Mr. Doctor. I beg your pardon, asked Mr. Doctor. My chore is at home, patron. I beg your patron, asked Mr. Doctor. My chore is at home is to put food in our fish tank, I said. Well, we sent on vacation to the beach last week, as an experiment, I didn't put fish food in the tank. Mr. Docker said. Then he came home and I looked at the result, I said. And what was the result? Asked Mr. Docker. The fish was dead. No food. Mr. Docker said. Mr. Docker. Well, I gave plenty of water, I said. And your conclusion? Without food, living things can die, I said. Awesome experiment, Ryan whispered. When I got back to my seat, you should get the Nobel Prize. Andrea stood up like she was mad that was no experiment. That was no experiment, she said. You just forgot to feed your fish and you killed it. You're a dumbhead. Oh, you sing to flowers? You call me a dumbhead? I said right back. Flowers don't even have ears. Mr. Docker told me and Andrea to calm down. I feel bad about your fish, AJ, he said. But I must invent admit you used a scientific method, so I'm giving you an A. I stuck my tongue at Andrea. Ha ha! In her face. She spent the whole vacation working on a dumb experiment while I was having fun boogie boarding. And I still got an A. Na 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 boo boo on her. It was the greatest moment of my life. What kind of fish was it? Mr. Doctor asked me. A sucker barb, I said. Everyone laughed just because sucker is a funny word. Can you tell us about sucker barbs? Wait. I never paid any attention to our fish. That's probably why I forgot to feed it before we went on our vacation. I will look up sucker barbs in my dictionary, Andrea said. She started flipping through pages. Suddenly, Andrea stopped and screamed. What's the matter? Andrea asked Mr. Doctor. Somebody drew a mean picture in my dictionary. Being nice to Andrea. It was you! Andrea yelled. You drew the picture in my dictionary in the word stupid. It was recess. She had dragged me to the big turtle so nobody could hear what she was saying. I did not. I lied. Did you? We went back and forth for a while. You'd better be nice to me, Andrea said, or I'm gonna tell everybody what AJ stands for. You don't even know what AJ stands for, I said. You're just trying to get me to tell. I know your tricks, Andrea said. Her mother is the vice president of the PTA, parents who talk a lot, and she can find out anything about anybody. Then she whispered in my ear, AJ stands for, and then she said it. Oh no, she was right. She knew. I thought I was gonna die. Andrea was gonna tell everybody. They'd be making fun of me forever. I'd never hear the end of it. My life was over. There was only one thing I could do. I would have to be nice to Andrea. When recess was over, Miss Stacy asked us to pick a partner to work on our social studies sheet. Hey, AJ, Andrea said loud enough for everybody to hear. Do you want to be my study partner? Most of the time, I work with Ryan or Michael. I would rather die than be buddies with Andrea, but also rather die than have anybody know what AJ stands for. Okay, I said. I was nice to Andrea all afternoon. It was the worst afternoon of my life. Finally, 3 o'clock came. Time to go home, Miss Stacy told us to clean up. Just before the bell rang, Andrea dropped her pencil box on the floor. Her pencils rolled all over. Hey, Jay, said Andrea. Be a dear and pick up my pencils. Any other day I would laugh at her and tell her to pick up her own dumb pencils. But this wasn't any other day. This was the day I found out that Andrea knew what AJ stands for. I picked up her dumb pencils. On the bus I wanted to sit alone, but Michael and Ryan grabbed seats next to me. You sure were nice to Andrea today, Ryan said. I saw her talking to you near the big turtle, Michael said. Ooh, Ron said. AJ and Andrea are in love. When are you going to be married? Michael asked. If those guys were not my best friends, I would hate them. The Truth About Mr. Docker. Chapter 7. The Truth About Mr. Docker. Mr. Docker, if I weigh 60 pounds, asked Michael, when we got to the science room, how much would I weigh in the moon? About 10 pounds, said Mr. Docker, who knows everything. My mother should go to the moon, I said. She was always trying to lose weight. Mr. Docker, when I smell something really bad, asked Ryan, is that yucky inside my nose? Well, yes, tiny particles of it, said Mr. Docker. The air carries dust, chemicals, even animals. Some of that cling goes to the hairs of your nose. Gross! Having hair in your nose is disgusting. Not to mention all the other stuff. No more questions today, said Mr. Docker. I want to show you something. He had a big pot on his desk, and smoke was coming out of it. What's that? Andrea asked. Liquid nitrogen, said Mr. Docker. A gas that has been turned into very cold liquid. Now, don't try this at home, kids. He took a long rose and dipped it into the pot. Then it took it out and hit the rose against the chalkboard. Those rose petals cracked off like they were potato chips. Cool, we all said. It's so cool. It's 350 degrees below zero, Mr. Docker said. Then he blew up a balloon and dipped it in the liquid nitrogen. When he took it out, it was tiny. Cold air makes things smaller, said Mr. Docker. Now watch this. He took a piece of wood out of his desk drawer. There was a nail sticking out of it. Then he took a banana and held it in the liquid nitrogen for about a minute. When he took it out, he started whacking the nail into the piece of wood with the banana. Cool! I never saw anybody hammer in a nail with a banana before. After science, we went to the volomotor room for lunch. Usually I shoot straw wrappers at Andrea and her annoying friends at the next table. But I had to be nice to her because I didn't want her telling everybody what AJ stands for. Andrea and Emily came over to our table. Is anyone sitting here? Andrea asked. Usually I would say something like obvious, obnoxious, like the invisible man is sitting here, so get lost. But I didn't. You can sit here, I said. Michael and Andrea giggled and made kissy faces. Ryan gave me a cupcake and gave me his asparagus. Ryan will eat anything. I wonder what Mr. Docker is eating, Michael said. Probably spiders. Yeah, Ryan said. I bet he's sprinkling them on his cereal. That's crazy. Nobody eats cereal for lunch. Somebody tells me that if you sprinkle bugs on your food, said Andrea, you don't care which meal it is. Mr. Docker sure is weird, Emily said. Maybe he's not a science teacher at all. I said, did you ever think of that? What do you mean? Asked Emily. Maybe he's just pretending to be a science teacher, I said. Yeah, said Ryan. Maybe he's a mad scientist who kidnaps real science teachers and swaps brains with them. Stuff like that happens all the time, you know. It does? Stop trying to scare Emily, said Andrea. Think about it, Michael said. Mr. Docker told us he has a laboratory at home. He wears a lab coat, he has a weird laugh, he eats bugs, and he uses a banana for a hammer. He's got to be a mad scientist. Maybe Mr. Docker is a loony who brainwashes people, Ryan suggested. Brainwash? Emily was shaking. What's that? That's a shampoo for bald guys, I said. They don't even have any hair, so they wash their brains. No, it's not, Ryan said. I saw brainwashing in a movie. They hook up wires to your head and wipe out your memory so you don't remember anything. Then they will program you to turn evil. We've got to do something, said Emily. And went running out of the auditorium. Emily is weird. She's right, you know. Andrea said, brainwashing our real science teacher. What can we do? Asked Michael. Mr. Docker lives down the street from me, Ryan said. We can spy on him. Then we can thwart his evil plan, I said. I always wanted to say thwart. It's a cool word. I saw it in a comic book once. We agreed to go on a secret spying mission at Mr. Docker's house on Saturday. Shh! Don't tell anybody. Chapter 8. Do not try this at home. It was Friday, the day before our big spy mission. Our spy mission. Mr. Docker had a bunch of cardboard milk cartons on his desk. Some little mirrors, too. What are we going to do with this stuff? I asked. We're going to make periscopes, he said. I saw a submarine movie where they used a periscope to see above water, said Ryan. In Greek, peri means around, said Mr. Docker, and scopes means to look. Mr. Docker helped us cut out holes in our milk cartons and glue mirrors inside so we could see around corners. It was cool. We each got to take our periscope home. Mr. Docker, does outer space end? Asked Andrea. That's one of the greatest mysteries in the universe, Mr. Docker said. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that. Why do birds fly? Ryan asked. It's faster than driving, said Mr. Docker, and everybody laughed, even though it wasn't funny. Lately, I noticed, Mr. Docker wasn't giving us very good answer. It was like he was getting sick of hearing why questions. Miss Lazar, the custodian, came into the science room with a big ladder. Hooray for Miss Lazar! Everybody chanted. Mr. Docker handed Miss Lazar a bowling ball with rope attached to it. She went up the ladder and tied the rope to the ceiling so the bowling ball hung up. Duty calls, Miss Lazar said and left. We all laughed because Miss Lazar said duty, and it sounds like just like duty. This is a pendulum, said Mr. Docker. He took the bowling ball and walked backward, pawing the bowling ball with him. Then he put the ball against his nose. What do you think will happen if I let go of this pendulum? Pendulum he asked. It will swing across the room and come back and smash you on the head. Let's do an experiment to find out, said Mr. Docker. Don't, we all shouted, but Mr. Docker let go of the ball anyways. Eek! Shouted the girls as the bowling ball swung across the room. Get out of the way, shouted Michael. Mr. Docker just stood there. We've got to do something, shouted Emily. She was right. The bowling ball was heading back to Mr. Docker for his head. I had to act fast. I remembered my Pee-wee football training. At the last possible second, I jumped and tackled Mr. Docker. He fell backwards and crashed into the skeleton in the corner. Bones went flying everywhere, and the skeleton was destroyed. But I had saved Mr. Docker's life. All those football practices paid off. Why did you do that, AJ? Asked Mr. Docker. As we were lying on the floor, I didn't want the bowling ball to hit in your face, I said. It was not going to hit me, I said. A swinging pendulum loses energy because of gravity and the air resistance that I was trying to show. Oh, sorry, I said. Sorry. Maybe he was right, but if you ask me, a grown man should not stand in front of a bowling ball. Chapter 9, Spying on Mr. Docker. Spying on people is cool. My sister Amy and I spy on our parents all the time. We tiptoe around and hide behind the furniture so we can write down their conversations. I always hope to hear good secrets, but all parents ever talk about is whose turn is it to take out the garbage and stuff like that. They're the most boring parents in the history of the world. On Saturday, Michael, Andrea, and Emily rode our bikes to Ryan's house. Ryan was all ready. He had sunglasses for all of those because spies always wear sunglasses. He had a milk carton, periscope. Ryan even had one of his famous stink bombs. Okay, he said, let's snikercise our potato clock. What does that mean? Emily asked. I don't know, Ryan said, but they always snikericized their watches in the spy movies. We tiptoed down to the street on Mr. Docker's house. It looked pretty normal. You would never know a mad scientist lived there. We hid behind a tree across the street. Ryan looked at the in the periscope. Can you see anything? Andre asked. No. Maybe he's not home, said Emily. We should go. Let's get closer, I said. We tiptoed across the street and sneaked up into Mr. Docker's driveway. If he comes home right now, we'll be in big trouble, Emily says. Don't be a baby, I said. Come on, let's peek in the window. I looked in the window. I hoped to see Mr. Docker swapping brains with somebody, but there was nobody inside. He's not home, Andrea said. Let's get out of here. Oops. I turned around. Ryan dropped the stink bomb in the middle of Mr. Docker's driveway. It broke open and got stink out. Ew, it's disgusting, Andrea said, holding her nose. Ugh, I think I'm gonna die, I said. I don't even think things could get any worse, but then they did. Suddenly, the garage door opened. Mr. Docker was standing there. He had a knife in his hand. We all screamed, He's crazy! Andre shouted, Run for your life! Chapter 10. The Stuntmobile. That crazy mad scientist, Mr. Docker, was 4 feet away. He was holding a big, sharp knife. I looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Michael. Michael looked at me. Andrea and Emily ran away. Are you going to swap our brains? I asked Mr. Docker. What are you doing with that knife? Asked Ryan. I'm peeling potatoes, Mr. Docker said. What's that smell? I made a stink bomb, Ryan said. Excellent, Mr. Docker said. I'm glad you're doing science projects at home. Welcome to my laboratory. We all looked around Mr. Docker's garage. It was filled with lots of test tubes, jars, and chemicals, and other stuff. But the thing that stood out was his car. It didn't even have metal covering. It like a normal car. The whole thing was covered with potatoes. What's that? Michael asked. You're just in time, said Mr. Docker. I've been working on it for months. It's finally done. Behold the Stuntmobile. The car was covered with rows and rows of potatoes. Each potato had wires attached to it, so that went to the engine. It was the weirdest looking car I ever saw. You built a car powered by potatoes? Ryan asked. It can also run on pickles, Mr. Docker replied. But I thought a pickle-mobile would sound silly. Do you want to ride? Sure, we said and climbed in. It has a new potato car smell, said Michael. What kind of mileage does this thing get? Ryan asked, who knows a lot about cars. About 5 miles per potato, Mr. Docker said. He turned the key. The engine started up with a quiet hum. Mr. Docker pulled out of the driveway. It really worked. Maybe someday All cars run on potatoes, Mr. Docker said. They won't have gas stations anymore. They'll have potato stations, and if you're driving out to get hungry, you can eat your car. The possibilities are endless, said Mr. Docker. We could heat our houses with potatoes. Someday we'll have potato-powered computers and TV sets. They could get potato-powered toys, I suggested. Potatoes not included. Mr. Docker let out one of his crackling laughs. That's when I realized he's not an evil mad scientist at all. Mr. Docker is the coolest nerd in the history of the world. We turned the corner, and there were Andrea and Emily on the sidewalk. They were staring at the potato car with their mouths wide open. They're like looking at a ghost. Check it out, Ryan shouted out the window. We're riding in a stuntmobile powered to the potato, shouted Michael. Na 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 boo boo on you, I shouted. My buzzing, mumbling brain. Chapter 11. My buzzing, bumbling brain. I could hardly sleep that night. My brain would not stop thinking about Mr. Docker and his amazing potato car. Lots of why questions were buzzing around in my head. I decided that science isn't nerdy after all. Science is cool. I don't want to be a football player anymore. When I grow up, I want to be a scientist like Mr. Docker. By the time I got to school, my brain was mumbling over with why questions. Miss Stacy, I asked as soon as she walked in the class, why do some people have curly hair and others have straight hair? Why is grass green? Why is it called a pair of pants when you only have one of them? I have no idea, said Miss Daisy, who doesn't know anything. I'm surprised to hear you asking all these questions. AJ, didn't you say science was for nerds? Cool nerds, I said. We have science this morning, she said. Maybe Mr. Docker can answer your questions. I could not wait to get to the science room. Mr. Docker was in there eating potato salad. Mr. Docker, I asked, why don't eggs break under a chicken? How can heavy boats float but light rocks sink? Do cats have belly buttons? Whoa, Mr. Docker said. Slow down, AJ. Why does my dad have hair growing out of his ears? I asked. How do microwave ovens work? What would happen if I dropped watermelon off the Empire State Building? AJ, I think I'm getting a headache, said Mr. Docker. Where do babies come from? Mr. Docker. Is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Why is water wet? How many toothpicks can you make out of a tree? That's enough, AJ, said Mr. Docker. Why do clocks go clockwise? Mr. Docker, I asked. Why do leaves change color? Why is ice slippery? If you don't milk a cow, will the cow explode? Stop, AJ, shouted Mr. Docker. Why are bubbles round? Mr. Docker. Why do we sneeze? What's the difference between jelly and jam? How come the cartoon characters run off cliffs? They don't fall right away. Why do grown-ups like vegetables? How come some people can roll their tongues and why other people can't? Where did Miss Coots' hair go? Why does the moon look bigger than the sun? I cannot take it anymore, Mr. Docker shouted. Then he ran out of the room. His head wasn't even on fire, but it was cool. Chapter 12. The worst moment of my life. We had to let Andrea sit with us in the auditorium because I was still being nice to her. My mom packed me a jelly sandwich because it was meatloaf today, and I hate meatloaf. I love meatloaf, said Andrea. It goes well with mashed potatoes. What a waste, I thought, looking at Andrea's mashed potatoes. Those potatoes could be powering someone's car or washing machine. Suddenly, Miss Coots came running into the auditorium. Has anybody seen Mr. Docker? Asked Miss Coots. He ran away again. Everybody looked at me. AJ drove him crazy, said Andrea, the big tattletale. He asked Miss Docker so many why questions that he went running out of the room. It's not my fault, I said. Mr. Docker was crazy long before I got to him. It is to your fault. It is to your fault. It is not. We went back and forth like that for a while. Finally, I got sick of listening to Andrea. I scooped up some of her mashed potatoes and mashed them on top of her head. Ha ha! Eek! Andrea screamed. Eek! Andrea screamed. I'm covered in potatoes. So is your face, I yelled. Andrea got up and stood on her chair. Hey, everybody, she yelled. I have an announcement. I know what AJ stands for. AJ stands for Arlo Jervis. No. She said it. I couldn't believe she actually said it out loud. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I had to think fast. The only thing I could do. I ran out of the auditorium. I ran out of the school. I ran home. And that's where I'm going to stay for the rest of my life. Maybe 1,100,000 years go by. Everybody will forget what AJ stands for. Arlo Jervis. Maybe then I'll be able to go back to school and face my friends again. Maybe then I'll be able to return to my normal life, but it won't be easy.